Hello everybody, welcome back to another Walking Dead video, and today we do my rewrites for Season 9 of The Walking Dead, and this will only be part 1 of 2 because it is that long. And as always, I do recommend you go back and watch the previous rewrite videos because it won't make much sense. I'm not going through all the rewrites that bring us to this point, so do go back and watch the previous videos. Look in the top right if you want to see that playlist. But let's jump right into the rules that I have, and I have 3 major rules for my rewrites. The first one is I just can't turn this into 100% fan fiction and throw everything out. I can't be like, oh, season 9, that's quite boring, I'm going to rewrite season 9 from scratch. No, I have to look at what we've had from the show and then more or less adapt it into a new form. That's how I'm seeing this. I'm seeing it as an adaptation of the TV show, which is an adaptation of the comics. So it's like a double adaptation, kinda. So that is what it really is. I am adapting the show to be slightly different, so there will be the same plots, but I have remixed them at some points really heavily. However, there is still the core part of the story from the show in my rewrites. So the next one is that death is inevitable. I cannot avoid death. I can move it forwards or backwards in the season, but death cannot be cheated altogether. There are major character deaths in season 9, and I can have them be moved around in season 9, but the same amount of characters that die in season 9 need to happen. I can switch out who dies, like for example, I switched out Denise dying for Carl in season 8, so Carl is still around in season 9. And going into this season, there are major character deaths like Tara, who's already been dead in my rewrites for seasons, so I can't avoid that because she replaced someone else's death. I have to have somebody replace Tara's death. Now, my final rule is very connected to death cannot be cheated, and that is when an external factor is the reason a character dies or leaves the shows, like for example Dale leaving in season 2, the actor left because he didn't want to work on the show anymore, I still have to treat that as a fixed point. I cannot be like, oh, I wanted Dale to survive, I'm going to bring him forwards and replace his death. No, because the actor stated publicly he wanted to leave the show, I have to get rid of him. So going into season 9, we will have actors like Andrew Lincoln who stated they wanted to leave the show. So Rick does have to leave at some point in my rewrites. I can move it around, but Rick cannot be in season 10. I have to remove him somehow. Now let's move on to the rewrites I'm bringing in from season 8, and there's a couple. However, this is not all the rewrites, so I do recommend you go back and watch the previous videos. But the big ones is that a lot of characters which are in season 9 of the show are not in my rewrites, like Carol, she died in season 7, and even Tara, she died in season 6. We also have a small character death with Sydney dying at the end of season 8, which leaves her Nan still alive and in charge of Oceanside. So we have characters like Michonne taking Carol's story, Andrea is still alive and she is taking Michonne's story and is Rick's love interest. We also have characters like Carl who are still alive, and Denise took his death in season 8, and we have other things like Daryl took up leadership of Sanctuary at the end of season 8, not because Rick puts him in charge, because of Dwight and Sherry, and Dwight and Sherry ask him and inspire him to try and turn Sanctuary into a haven. Rick also had his leg broken at the end of season 8, and when we last saw him, he was injured and he couldn't walk properly. Rick also had a massive CRM counter in season 8, and he was being chased down by Jadis and her scavengers because he stole some CRM property. Jadis and her scavengers played very little role in the actual all-out war arc itself, but was wiped out by the end of the season by the CRM for failing to capture Rick. And those are just only a few of the rewrites and the more relevant ones to help you know when we're going into these episodes. If you want more rewrites, just go back and watch the previous episodes, as I do recommend you should, because you're gonna fully understand the situation then, and how certain characters are still alive and how certain characters died way sooner. So let's jump right into this. Episode 1 takes place about a year and a half after season 8, and this episode starts with a group in the woods trying to run away from some walkers, and we get the shot from episode 6 where we have Magna's group trying to escape these walkers, and we see bullets come from the trees. They run into the trees and we see Carl, like what Judith does in the show where she brings this new group back. Carl does also, and now it's about a year and a half later. Carl at this point in time is about 15 years old. Once we're back at Alexandria, we see Alexandria has been rebuilt. It's very much almost self-sufficient. It has farms and everything like in the show. Then we meet Rick again, and we see Rick is in the infirmary with Sadiq, and what they're talking about in this scene is that Rick and Sadiq are talking about Rick's leg from last season, and it hasn't properly healed yet. And Sadiq mentions how Rick might not get full mobility of his leg again, and he might need some form of aid to be able to get around. This conversation is cut short, however, by Aaron coming in and warning Rick about Carl bringing back new people to the community. Rick then meets the new group that Carl brought in, and immediately takes inside to go interview each one of them individually. As Rick is still here, there is no council, he is the sole one interviewing them. There is no issue with all the others, like in the show. However, like in the show, Rick does notice something about Magna and realises that she's a criminal. However, Rick is not like Michonne in the show, and he is not immediately aggressive, and he's more kind of chilled down. We have a very chill kind of farmer-like Rick from season 4, and Rick just simply asks her questions about how she met her group, what was she in for, and stuff like that. And Magna starts off very much kind of walls up and against Rick. However, some time passes and we see that Rick has come to the point where he realizes Magna is not really a threat, and he offers Magna a deal. Rick's deal is that the communities can take in Magna's group. However, Alexandria doesn't have the space for all 5 of them, and he offers them a space in another community, but they will have to come with him on this mission to DC first. So this ends with everyone leaving Alexandria, head to DC, minus Yumiko, which is currently in the infirmary. The DC plot from Season 9, Episode 1 is the same minus Maggie and Jadis. The people are going are Rick, Magna's people, which are Magna, Connie, Kelly, Luke, Daryl, Andrea, Michonne, Ezekiel, Rosita, Gabriel, and Eugene. The plot is the same as the show, but Eugene is the one that got the idea, not Jadis, and he is the reason they are going there. And Eugene would take all of Jadis' scenes where they are trying to head to this museum to go get that seed vault. This is all Eugene's idea, and he'll be the one leading everyone around. Michonne will have slightly different scenes also, as Michonne will take Carol's scenes and everything about that. It's just switched. And Andrea will take all of Michonne's scenes, like Andrea will see that and she'll see the laws and she will want to make her own little kind of manuscript. Everything else is more or less the same, with a few character switches around. Once they leave DC, this is where things start to change. On the way outside of DC, when they are just kind of starting to separate and go back to their own little communities, Daryl and Rick end up having a conversation about Magna's group. Daryl is very against taking on more people and talks about how Sanctuary is not ready to expand that much more. They're still trying to get things in the Sanctuary ready. They're still building from the war. However, Rick keeps pushing and Daryl eventually gives away and agrees to take on 3 of Magna's group. Rick agrees that's a suitable compromise, and just before Rick and Magna's group split off from everyone else to head back to Sanctuary, Luke volunteers to stay back with Yumiko until she is better. So going towards Sanctuary is only Rick, Daryl, Magna, Connie, and Kelly. On the way to the Sanctuary, Kelly starts to complain about a smell. Daryl then comments that you will get used to that, and then we get a shot of the Sanctuary. We see it's a little rough around the edges, however, we see that the factory is actually burning and it is actually being used. Once inside, Daryl gives our group a little tour, and we find out Sanctuary is being used to make fuel from the little crops that grow, and they're using walkers as fuel so they can burn the factory to create things like weapons, armor, ammo, and scrap metal, along other things. Daryl then shows Magna and her group to their rooms and then takes Rick to his little office to talk about what is going on at Sanctuary. Daryl mentions how food is starting to run low and Sanctuary is still not able to provide enough food to be self-sufficient. Daryl talks about how the bridges are out and trading is getting harder and morale is getting really low. at the sanctuary because of the food issue, and people are starting to disappear because of this. 6 people have already left within 7 weeks. Rick then agrees to go to Hilltop to get some food for him. We then cut to Maggie, and we see that she is making a speech and that they are currently holding an election at the Hilltop for who should be the leader. While they are waiting for the vote to be cast and find out who the next leader, Rick gets to the Hilltop, and we get the scene between Rick and Maggie like in the show, where Rick is asking that Maggie provides more food to the sanctuary, but Maggie is very much against it. She really doesn't want to provide any more. Maggie then makes a counter offer that she'll provide more food if Daryl provides more to the Hilltop, and the Hilltop gets more ammo, more manpower to do building, and more supplies like metal, sheet metal and stuff like that, plus weapons. Rick, realizing this is the only way that Daryl can get his people food, agrees to it. Then the results of the election come in, and we find out Maggie won by a landslide over Gregory. Maggie then offers Rick to stay for the celebrations. Rick agrees, and then we see Rick having a courier leave Hilltop with a carriage full of food for Sanctuary. Some time passes, and then we see Gregory talking to the blacksmith that has recently lost his son because of a previous decision Maggie made not too long ago. He then convinces this blacksmith to try and assassinate Maggie. Everything about the end of episode 1 is more or less the same as in the show, with the blacksmith attempting to assassinate Maggie. Maggie survives the assassination to then have Gregory attempt to assassinate her, and like in the show, Maggie survives that and then decides to hang Gregory, and this plot ends with Maggie hanging Gregory minus Daryl and Michonne in the scene, just Rick alone watching this happen. We then cut to the courier that Rick sent out hours ago just before the celebration started. On his journey towards the sanctuary, he hears a noise come through the woods. He looks in, and then we see an unknown figure lunge at the man, and then black. End of episode 1. Episode 2 takes place about a day or a bit later, and we start with Rick resting in his room in Hilltop, rubbing his leg in pain. Eugene then comes in and wants to talk to Rick about the issues with the bridges and the trade routes being disrupted. Rick tries to hide the fact that he is in pain and tries to stand up, but Eugene quickly notices and then comments that he could make a leg brace or something like that to reduce the pain that Rick is suffering from. Rick quickly turns the subject back to the bridges and the issue of the trade routes. Rick and Eugene come up with a plan to go build bridges so that trade will become easier and they do not have to make longer journeys. While exiting to go back to their respective communities, Eugene to the sanctuary to go get supplies and Rick to Alexandria to go get people, they come across Daryl at the entrance. Daryl mentions to Rick that the courier never made it to Sanctuary and that they're still running low on supplies. At this point, the story breaks into 2 plots. We have one plot which is Rick going back to Alexandria trying to convince people to help with the build, and the second plot is about Daryl going out to go find this missing person with the help of Jesus, Maggie and Alden as they all volunteered to help. The Rick plot is more or less a very calm plot, which is about Rick going to Alexandria, and we have Rick meeting up with some of the characters. First of all, we have Rick meeting Andrea, and Andrea is doing what Michonne did in the start of season 9, and she's currently trying to build those laws and get that big kind of charter made. We then have Rick go to the infirmary to meet Sadiq, and he sees Carl and needed helping on there. Carl mentions that Negan is not eating again, and the rest of the plot is about Rick talking to Negan about the new world and all their plans and what Rick has built and trying to get him to eat. Negan is still refusing until the point where Rick pulls out Lucille, and we see that Rick is the one in possession of Lucille. And we see Lucille's very battered, and Rick's been kind of using Lucille to mentally torture Negan at this point. And that farmer Rick that we've been seeing in episode 1 and so far in episode 2 is gone, and we have more the red machete Rick back, and Rick comes up with a dilemma for Negan. He either eats or Lucille gets burned, and we see Rick starting to light up Lucille, covering it in fuel, until the point where Negan gives in and starts eating his sandwich. This plot ends with Rick leaving Negan's cell to see Aaron, and Aaron confirms they now have the manpower from Alexandria. The Daryl plot is the main focus of this episode, and this part will just focus on Daryl, Jesus, Alden, and Maggie, plus a few of Daryl's men, going out to go and find the missing person. This plot will start with them going to actually find the cart, and then finding tracks leading off into the woods. They will follow the tracks up until they find the junkyard. Once they enter the junkyard, they see the carnage of what happened in Season 8 finale. While everyone looks around, they see there's basically a sea of dead bodies surrounding them. Jesus scouts ahead deeper into the junkyard to try and find the missing person. However, they hear a noise and a helicopter flies over their head, and Jesus is quickly swarmed by a group of walkers. He manages to get back to the main entrance, and Daryl ends up seeing somebody on the mounds of trash, and this person causes a mound of trash to fall and collapse on them. The whole group is now surrounded by trash and walkers with no exit. The group then take up a defensive position around Alden while he tries to find an exit and dig a way through to the exit through the mound of trash. While everyone's in defensive, Maggie keeps falling back and ends up getting Daryl's men killed and using them as pawns to buy time to distract the walkers. Alden finally is able to secure the exit and then ushers everyone in. Once Daryl and Jesus are in plus Alden, Maggie goes in next. Maggie, seeing the horde is hot on their heels, turns back at the remainder of Daryl's saviors and then shoots them and closes the exit to buy time for our group to make it out. Daryl witnessed this and then explodes at Maggie for killing his men and trying to get everyone killed just because she's still mad at Negan. Maggie argues that they are not his men, they are saviors, and saviors do not matter. Jesus ends up siding with Daryl about the saviors are not dangerous anymore and they're now one of us. This plot ends with the group split into two groups. Jesus and Daryl continue to go and find the missing person, and Maggie and Alden go back to the hilltop. Episode 3 takes place about a week or two later, and the episode starts with Rick talking to Negan about the communities building the bridge and all coming together. We then cut to Rick overlooking the bridge production, like in episode 2. There'll be 3 plots in this episode. The Rick plot focuses on Rick's episode 2 plot, so there will be about Rick overseeing the bridge with Eugene, and it'll be about them dealing with the lack of manpower, as Hilltop is not helping at all, other than a small group that Alden has brought to the bridge. Since Maggie has killed some of Daryl's men, the saviors under Daryl's control are aggressive to Alden's small group. This leads to a fight between Alden and a savior. Daryl has to break it up. Daryl does not get involved in the fight, however, as the savior quickly stops out of respect of Daryl. The rest of this plot is about the Horde, like in episode 2, and all of terror seems to be placed by Carl, and Carl is more or less helping Rosita, who is in charge of the movement and distraction of the Horde. During this, while we see in the show, it all goes well up until when the sirens don't go off. The same happens here. All the sirens go off but one. This leads the Horde into the logging camp, and we get the scene where the walkers are attacking the logging camp and Aaron gets his arm crushed. Rick shoots the rope to distract the walkers, get rid of the walkers, and Aaron gets rushed to Enid and Sadiq. Like in the show, Enid and Sadiq cut off Aaron's arm to save him. The second plot is about Daryl trying to keep everyone safe and figure out why people keep going missing. This plot starts with Daryl after the Alden Savior fight, and Daryl talks to Rick about him being unsure about Alden's group being here. Rick reassures Daryl that Alden being here is doing more good than damage in the long run. The rest of this plot will pick up after the attack at the logging camp and will be about Daryl trying to figure out why did one of the alarms not go off. Daryl quickly finds out that Gabriel is missing. The rest of this plot is trying to figure out where Gabriel is with the help of Alden, as Alden insists to tag along to help Daryl. Daryl uses some of his own men also in the group, and he brings along Magna, Connie and Kelly. Just before Daryl goes out to search, he informs Rick. Rick wants to do a full-scale search to find Gabriel, however, Daryl convinces him that's a bad idea, as that will cause mass panic among the workers. So Rick agrees to not mention it, and Daryl, Alden, Magna, Kelly, and Connie go out to go and find Gabriel. The third plot is a Maggie and Andrea plot, and this plot will start with Maggie talking to the blacksmith like at the start in the show. This will end with Maggie letting him out, and the rest of this will focus on Andrea coming to the hilltop to talk to Maggie to ask her why she is not helping with the building. Maggie talks about how she will not help as the saviors are there, and Alden can run off and do what he wants, but she will not stand for it. Andrea explains that the saviors are no longer Negan's men, but they are Daryl's, but Maggie does not see a difference. Maggie then asks Andrea about Negan and if he's all cozy in his cell. Andrea tells Maggie that he is being punished and will spend the rest of his life there. Maggie then explodes and shouts at Andrea, telling her that he is not being punished enough and needs to die for his crimes. Maggie then orders her men to imprison Andrea. They are reluctant, but they do what Maggie says. This plot ends with Maggie leaving the hilltop for Alexandria, and Andrea being imprisoned in the hilltop cells. We then pick back up with Daryl's group on the trail to go find Gabriel. They end up back at the junkyard and see it's empty again. No walkers, not even bodies this time. Kelly, looking around, ends up finding Gabriel, and they find out he is bait and that they are planning to attack the camp tonight. We then cut back to Rick walking around the camp like in episode 2. We see Rick looking in at the campfire, and we see Ezekiel proposing to Michonne with his big speech. A celebration soon starts, and a couple hours later, Rick pulls himself away from the celebrations to go back to his tent. However, before he can get back into his tent, Rick hears his name being called out from the darkness. Rick looks into the darkness and says, "Jadis." We then hear Jadis say, "Get him," and Rick gets hit on the back of the head, then black. Episode 4 starts with a flashback to the ending of Season 8 after the mass shooting at the junkyard. We see Jadis is the only survivor, and the CRM have killed everyone, and the ones that they haven't killed, taken them with them to be A's and B's. This flashback ends with Jadis being found after some time roaming around by a group of people. Intro. Then the episode picks up with Daryl and his group getting back to the camp, and they see a full-on fight and everyone is fighting everyone. There seems to be a bit of confusion on who is actually attacking. Daryl seems to find Carl, then Carl and Daryl's group make their way to Rick's tent. On the way there, they pass through the small Oceanside camp and see Oceanside has been hit the hardest, and most of Oceanside is already dead and seems to be murdered in their sleep. They find the leader of Oceanside, the old lady, the grandmother of Sydney, is already dead and is turned. Once they get to Rick's tent, they see Rick's tent has been ransacked and Rick is missing. They find tracks just outside Rick's tent, and the rest of this plot is about them hunting down Rick and following the tracks. The second plot is about Maggie going to Alexandria and will loosely follow the plot from Season 9, Episode 5. The plot will start with Jesus letting Andrea out of the cell and helps her to escape so she can chase down Maggie and stop her from killing Negan. Jesus then radios in Alexandria and Luke picks up. Jesus will inform Luke about Maggie and tells him to stall Maggie when she gets there until Andrea gets there. We then pick up with Rick with Jadis. After a long night of travel and the sun is starting to rise, Rick's mask is removed. Rick looks around and sees that he's in a nearly empty Oceanside and sees that people from Oceanside are being pulled out of their rooms, pulled out of buildings, and being shot in the open. Rick then notices some Oceansiders are actually killing them, and that he's being watched over by Beatrix and some people from the hilltop. Rick, visibly confused, tries to understand the situation and starts asking questions. Beatrice explains that they want all saviors dead and Rick is in their way and stopping them from having proper peace, and Rick is enforcing his laws upon everyone else, and some people aren't happy, so they're taking it into their own hands to fix everything and wrong the right. That's how they see it. A helicopter then flies overhead and lands just on the other side of a tree line. Jess then walks up to the group and talks to Rick, saying that they are here and that Rick doesn't have long left. We then see some CRM soldiers, about 4, leaving the tree line and walking over to Rick. Rick, recognizing what happens next, tries to escape and charges Jadis. In the fight with Jadis ends up getting the upper hand and stabs Rick 4 times. 3 times in the chest and 1 time in the knee. Then the soldiers get over and stand over Rick. They ask for the map and Jadis hands over the map that he got from his tent. The soldier then prepares to kill Rick, but then is stopped when an arrow comes out and kills Beatrix. The soldiers turn around and they see Daryl's group. A fight then breaks out between the 2 groups. The CRM soldiers immediately try and pull back because all they want is the map. This leads the exiles open and they end up being slaughtered by Daryl's group and have to escape, leaving just the 4 CRM soldiers and Jadis left. They get easily picked off until it is just 1 CRM soldier and Jadis. Once they get to the helicopter, Jadis tries to get in with the soldier, but the soldier kills Jadis and takes off by himself with the map. Carl then rushes over to Rick and tries to stabilize him before he blacks out. The scene ends with everyone taking Rick and leaving Oceanside while walkers start to pour in. Then we go back to the Maggie plot and we see Maggie has finally arrived at Alexandria and she's greeted at the gate by Yumiko and Luke. She tries to force her way in, but Yumiko and Luke are able to subdue Maggie and wait until Andrea gets there. Once Andrea's there, we get the Michonne and Maggie scene from episode 5, and like in the show, Andrea sees Maggie's point of view and lets her go see Negan. Before Maggie goes in to see Negan, she sees Lucille and takes it before she enters the cell. The Negan versus Maggie scene, as in the show, is the same here, but with Maggie holding Lucille, not a crowbar. Maggie sees that Negan is worse than death and killing him is actually what he wants and decides to let him go. The plot ends with Maggie leaving Alexandria with Negan alive. The episode then picks up after a small time jump and Rick has healed from his injuries. We see Rick in the infirmary with Andrea and Sadiq, and Sadiq is explaining to Rick that because of his stab to his leg, his knee will probably never heal now, and he will probably need a brace on his leg and a cane to be able to walk from now on. Rick asks him, is he sure, does he actually need it? But Andrea butts in and tells him it's okay to be hurt. It's okay to need a cane to walk. People will still see him as his leader. He will still be the legend that was able to take down Negan and free all the communities. And he doesn't need to feel ashamed that he needs to use a cane. And people will not think less of him. Rick then reluctantly agrees to Sadiq that he will do so, and this little scene ends with Rick holding Andrew in one hand and a cane in the other while leaving the infirmary. We then go over to Hilltop and we see Maggie after what happened in her plot. Maggie is sitting there thinking about what happened, and then Alden walks in and asks if she needs anything. Maggie jokes about finding a place far, far away from here, and Alden says, "Why do you not do it?" Maggie then tries to explain that she can't because the Hilltop needs her, but Alden explains that the Hilltop will be fine. There's good people here and Jesus is a good leader. Maggie then eventually agrees to leave with Alden, and the episode ends with Maggie and Alden packing their bags and leaving the gates of Hilltop. Episode 5 starts with a 6-year time jump like in the show, and we'll start with Michonne walking around the kingdom like Carol does in Season 9, Episode 6. All the scenes are the same, but with Michonne taking Carol's scenes. So we get the scenes with seeing that the Hilltop is starting to fall apart, and Henry is trying to repair it. Everything is the same. However, the difference is that Henry wants to go to the Sanctuary, not the Hilltop, as Alexandria and the Sanctuary have a closer relationship with the Kingdom than Hilltop, as Hilltop has become a more reclusive community. Then we cut to the goodbye scenes that we get in episode 6 of season 9, and it's mostly the same, just instead of them leaving to go to the Hilltop, it's Michonne taking Henry to go to the Sanctuary. We then cut over to Carl, Eugene, Aaron and Rosita out trying to hunt some deers. They then notice a horde is starting to wander near one of their trade routes and decide to head back to inform everyone so they can come up with a plan. At this point now, Carl is about 21 years old. Back at Alexandria, everyone's wondering why they're back early, and then we meet Rick now. He is now old man Rick and he still uses his cane and leg brace to get around. Carl informs Rick about the horde and the meeting starts. During this meeting, Eugene explains that the horde is not a direct threat to Alexandria at the moment, but will get in the way of their trade routes and some long overdue maintenance on their radio tower. Aaron butts in and talks about how they need to act now. They can't wait weeks for the walkers to pass, because then they will have no radio communications for weeks, and that is a key thing to warn everyone about the walkers. After hearing all of the opinions about the walker horde, Rick makes a plan to make two groups. We have Eugene and Rosita go to the radio tower to repair it to send out a message, and then we have Carl, Aaron, Andrea and Gabriel go out to try and distract the horde and bring them away from the radio tower long enough for Eugene to send a signal out so they can all get back. And this is when the episode will break into two plots. We'll have one which will focus on Eugene, which will follow the episode 6 season 9 story, and then we'll have the other one which will focus on Andrea and her group trying to distract the walkers away from Eugene. Just before everyone leaves Alexandria, Carl goes to get ready for the mission. He sees Enid messing with the radio and comments that they're going to get it fixed and soon she'll be able to talk to Sadiq again. They kiss and Carl leaves. We then jump back to Michonne and Henry on their travel to the sanctuary. We get the scenes from season 9 episode 6 where Michonne and Henry are travelling, and then Henry hears a noise, gets off his carriage and runs to go help him. Michonne realises the trap, tries to stop him, and like in the show, they get surrounded by saviours. But in this version, they get surrounded by exiles, which are people from what's left of Oceanside and some of the people that left Hilltop. Like in the show, these people try to rob everyone, and Michonne ends up getting defensive. Instead of going back later like Carol does, Michonne kills them all right in front of Henry. Henry is stunned by the skill that Michonne has, and Michonne ushers him back to the carriage. They go back on their journey to Sanctuary. We then go back to Rick and follow him doing his duties around Alexandria, and we see him as more of an overseer now, and he's Farmer Rick again. We then meet Judith, who's about 9 to 10 now, and we see her doing her homework with Negan like in the show. And all the scenes are more or less the same, other than Rick taking Michonne's scene. So Rick is the one to send Judith away and to talk to Negan about stop talking to Judith. Negan does not back down though, and talks about how she's the only person that treats Negan like a human being. And we see Farmer Rick breaks a little, and Rick starts to become his little red machete Rick, and he uses his cane to take out Negan's leg, and then threatens Negan that if he does it again and talks to Judith again, he will turn Lucille into firewood and burn her in front of Negan. The rest of this episode dedicates itself to the two plots going out to deal with the walkers. So we will follow Aaron, Andrea, Carl, and Gabriel trying to lure the walkers away with loud noises. However, Aaron notices something wrong, and the walkers start to ignore the noises and start to go back to the group that are trying to do the radio tower. We then see from Andrea's perspective, while she's watching the walkers, one of the walkers goes up to this noise machine they have, which is a clock or something like that, picks it up and turns it off. We then cut over to Eugene and Rosita, and all their scenes will be the same as in episode 6, with them travelling there, all nice and calmly having the conversation, and then going up and doing the tower while Rosita suddenly spots the walkers coming close. Like in the show, Eugene gets down and injures himself, and they try and get away with the walkers on their tail. Then we go back to Michonne and Henry finally get into the sanctuary. They are greeted at the gate by Yumiko and Magna, and we see that the sanctuary is now a well-established community, and that Daryl has finally fulfilled his promise to Dwight and Sherry all those years ago. Once they're inside the walls of the sanctuary, we meet Daryl once again, and now he is a full leader in his own right, and no longer in the shadow of Rick Grimes in the eyes of the people of the sanctuary. The plot ends with Daryl agreeing to take on Henry as an apprentice and train him to be a blacksmith. The plot then jumps back to Eugene and Rosita trying to escape, and we get the scene from episode 6 with them escaping, going down the little ditch, covering themselves in mud, and we hear the walkers talking, saying, "Where are they? Don't let them get away." End of episode. Episode 6 starts with Michonne saying goodbye to Henry at the gates towards Sanctuary as Michonne goes back to the kingdom, and Henry joins Daryl, Magna, Yumiko, Connie and Kelly on a trip to get supplies from Alexandria. The episode then switches to Rosita running through the woods and collapsing, but then is found by Andrea's group, which is Andrea, Carl, Gabe and Aaron. Andrea quickly orders the group to retreat to the hilltop as that is the closest. Gabriel then volunteers to go back to Alexandria to warn everybody about what has happened. We then get introduced to the hilltop and we see how massive the community is now, and it has massive fields of crops and it is thriving and probably the most prosperous of all the communities. Once our group gets to the gates, they struggle to get in until Jesus comes in and lets them in personally, as the guards were not doing so. We see that Jesus is now the new leader and Jesus welcomes Andrea and a group to the hilltop. We then have Jesus take Rosita to the infirmary and we see Sadiq still setting up and being kind of shunned upon by the other hilltop people. Jesus, Aaron and Andrea then go off to the big house to go talk about what has happened to Rosita and Eugene mostly. Carl stays behind to offer his help to Sadiq with securing and stabilizing Rosita and help him set up. While the group is talking in the house, they talk about how there's new walkers and Jesus immediately offers to help go find Eugene, to the dismay of one of his people in the room. Scene ends with Jesus, Aaron and Andrea leaving Hilltop to go find Eugene. Now back to Alexandria and we see Rick is trying to talk to Negan and trying to counsel him like Gabriel does in the show. However, it does not seem to go well as Negan starts to talk about Carl and Enid and Rick tries to stop him. But Negan continues and talks about how from his window he can see a lot and that he can tell that something is up between Carl and Enid and not everything is good. Somebody's keeping a secret. Rick, having enough of Negan, walks out and while he's exiting he notices Luke welcoming people through the gates. He sees that Daryl has made it with his small group to Alexandria and you notice that they picked up someone along the way and it is Gabriel. Gabriel quickly goes to Rick and warns him about what has happened and that Eugene is missing. Henry overhears this and he volunteers and wants to go help, but Daryl shuts him down and says that his group will do it instead. It's best that Daryl should go as he's currently the best tracker they have. Rick agrees and Daryl with a small group of Kelly, Connie, Daryl himself, Yumiko and Magna agree to be the ones to go out and find Eugene while Henry stays at Alexandria. Rick also comes up with the plan that a second group should travel to Hilltop to go and see Rosita and get their people back, so that a second group, which will be Rick, Enid, who overhears and knows that Carl's there, insists on going. Rick is reluctant, but he eventually agrees. And also Luke decide to travel to the hilltop. While everyone is getting ready to leave to go find Eugene and travel to the hilltop, Henry takes this time to sneak into the back of Rick's carriage so that he can travel to the hilltop with Rick's group. The rest of this episode is about Andrea's group and Daryl's group going to look for Eugene and will follow the plots of episode 8. Andrea's group will be about them trying to avoid the horde and travel to the last location Rosita saw Eugene. During this plot, we will have a scene between Aaron and Jesus talking about the people of Hilltop and that they're welcome to join the communities. Jesus will mention that the people of Hilltop are not ready for Rick's vision and that people want to be independent because they've been under the Saviors for so long. And they've had so many issues with Maggie leaving and them having to deal with the fallout of the Exiles, as the Hilltop survived the Exiles event, whereas the other community, Oceanside, didn't. Hilltop still has the representation with people like Daryl's group of being backstabbed and murdered. So Jesus says that Hilltop just needs some time and that he needs to respect the wants and needs of his people and can't force them to accept Rick's vision. He is trying to push them to like it, like them doing the trading with Alexandria, with them trading over the doctor, which is Sadiq, to join the community so that they can warm relations between Rick's group and the people of Hilltop. Then we pick back up with Rick's group traveling to Hilltop and Rick remembers what Negan said about Carl and Enid and asks Enid is anything up and says, I used to be a cop, I can tell when something is wrong. Enid then tells Rick to not tell Carl and it's a secret, but she thinks she is pregnant. Rick erupts with joy and from the news he hugs Enid. The moment is broken, however, by Luke pointing out that there's something in the tree line. Everyone turns around and starts to look into the trees, but they see nothing. However, everyone agrees that they feel like they're being watched and feel very uneasy. The scene ends with the group speeding up and trying to get to Hilltop as fast as possible before they find out if they actually are being watched or not. Then we pick up back up with Daryl, and Daryl's plot will be like Daryl's plot from episode 8, minus Jesus and Aaron, and Yumiko and Magna will take their roles. Yumiko will take Aaron's, Jesus will be taken by Magna. So all the scenes are the same, with Daryl's group finding Eugene and their group being chased by the walkers. Daryl's group will also have the same scenes, with them wanting to split up, with Magna suggesting it, but Yumiko is against it. They will have the same scenes with Daryl and his dog trying to strike them, but it doesn't seem to work. This leads to the group being cornered and being chased into a graveyard, where they find out they are trapped. Aaron's group realizes there's no way out, quickly get ready to fight for the death, or at least try and buy enough time until somebody can figure out. And then Andrew's group comes from the other side, and like in the show, Andrew's group helps them get open the gate so as everyone can get out. As the gate's being open, people start to climb through, and Magna tells Yumiko to get out of here while she covers them and fights them off like Jesus did in the show. Like in the show also, Magna will get Jesus' death, and while she's fighting a walker will dodge underneath her and stab her in the back. Yumiko screams, and then the group charge the walkers. The fight happens, and the episode ends with Yumiko crying over a dead Magna and Daryl looking at these dead walkers. While looking at them, he finds out they're not actually walkers, but they're people wearing masks. However, not all of the walkers that charged them were just people in masks. And this is where we'll leave it in this video. So make sure to hit that subscribe button to get part 2 of the season 9 rewrites. So please tell me down below, what do you think about part 1 of season 9? Tell me your thoughts and opinions and everything down below. I would like to know, what do you think about Rick? Where do you think the story is going to go? Where do you think I'm going to take it? What do you think about the death of Magna taking Jesus' place? And what's your opinion on Oceanside being destroyed at the end of episode 4? I'd like to know all your thoughts and opinions down below. And make sure to look on the screen to look at some more Walking Dead content. I recommend you do click on one of the other videos, because you can get more rewrites, you can get some news videos, you can get some theory videos. So make sure to look at something that's recommended for you in the bottom. If you want the previous rewrite, look in the top right. And if you want my next rewrite, look in the top left. But this is it for me today, and if you want to subscribe, and I recommend you do, to keep up to date with all things Walking Dead, 2 videos a week every week, and to be ready for when season 9 part 2 comes out, make sure to subscribe so you can get it as soon as it comes out. But this is it for me today, so goodbye, peace out, and I'll talk to you at a later date.